All right. So, chapter 4 and verse 10, how beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride, how much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Um, we we mentioned last time and in the introduction this morning that clearly this is an expression of his love for her. But what we see in the arc of the story up to this point is that he first loved, she responded to that love, and her returned love is now being shown to bring him delight. Are we also told that if we fail to love God, that rather than bring him delight causes him grief and sorrow? Yeah. Now, that ought to be self-evident, right? Because if he cares for us and loves us and we don't do those things, every relationship we sustain, that's how it works. Um, and it even can get to the point of what? At least with men, if that love goes unrequited, if there's no display of it in behavior, if there's no, both things can be a problem, by the way. If the behavior doesn't match the speech because the speech is I love you, but the behavior says something different, there's a problem. If the speech doesn't match the behavior because the behavior suggests that I love you, but you never say anything, there's a problem. It takes both of them working together in concert, in symphony, which would be the right word. Uh, it takes both of them working together, but if there's a discord in those things, that creates problems. And eventually, at least among people, that can grow to be resentment and even hatred. Um, so God understands us. He understands our weaknesses. How does he understand our weaknesses? Because he came and lived as one of us. And that argument is made in the New Testament. We have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses because he came and lived through them. He understands. As a result of that, he accommodates our needs. And that's what he's doing here. Um, the bridegroom delights not only in her appearance, look at verse 11. Your lips drip nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. What is that all about? Poetic language is interesting. It is very descriptive and it is very powerful when it's understood, but it's also easy to miss the point, especially if you don't think about it carefully. So, what does he mean? Your lips drip nectar. Okay, on the surface, I'm going to tell you this. Do anyone's lips literally drip nectar? No. So clearly, this isn't to be taken literally. And as far as I know, no one extracts nectar and then pours it all over their face so that it drips off their lips. And so that's not even, I'm sorry. Yeah. Uh, I have 4 times, well, actually more than that, if you count my sisters. So um, that's okay. Uh, it's a good observation. Uh, but that is not what he means. And that's your point. So what does he mean? The words that she uses, the things that she says, her communication means something to him. And again, to get back to what we were talking about in the introduction, that's why it's important to tell the people that are in relationships with you how you feel about the relationship and how important the relationship is and what it means to you. That's why it's important to say thank you, despite the fact that the person you're saying thank you to has told you 70,000 times, you don't have to tell me thank you. But I'm going to do it anyway because I want you to know I appreciate you and what you've done. Your lips are nectar. So he delights not only in her appearance, but also in what comes from her lips, her speech. That the New Testament refers to that as the fruit of lips. And that passage is an interesting passage because it is almost always applied to singing, which is a proper application of it, but it's not exclusively singing. It is all of our communication, both when we profess God, when we pray to God. That's the fruit of our lips. That is using the ability that God has given us to communicate in a way that brings glory and honor and respect to Him and that shows our appreciation for Him. And the fact of the matter is, whether we like to admit it or not, and I think we like to admit it when it serves our interest to admit it, but we don't like to admit it when we want people to think that we're strong. Um, the willingness of the people around us to openly profess their faith and their love and appreciation for God and what God has done emboldens us to do the same. And therefore, when we are around people who do not do that, we are more likely what? To also not do it. Now, if we want to boil that down to sophomoric, mundane language, we would say that that is peer pressure. What the Bible talks about is stimulation to love and good deeds for mutual edification. What the Bible suggests is that when we are in the world surrounded by worldly people, God recognizes that it is hard for us to remain faithful. So he tells us very specifically not to forsake assembling with people who have a like faith and who profess godliness so that you can be stimulated to love and good deeds. And yet again, right after prayer, what's the second most frequent thing that we give up in our spiritual life? Worship and association with our brethren. Not just worship ourselves, but collective worship, corporate worship, public worship. We give that up, it becomes easier and easier to give other things up as well. And so he's letting her know, listen, I not only appreciate your beauty, I'm not just lusting after you. I appreciate the person that you are. I appreciate the character that is expressed from your speech and your communication. And communication is an interesting word. We tend to restrict communication today to the idea of either speech or written language, but communication, it at least in its origin, is a much broader word than that and would include nonverbal behavior as well. And in fact, when I studied communication, there was a whole class that I had to take called nonverbal communication to learn that truly everything around us communicates something. The colors we use, the arrangement we set things up. Quite frankly, this is a terrible setup. Absolutely awful. In a perfect world, it wouldn't be here because you do not want to put a barrier between you and the person you're talking to. And that's exactly what this serves. Now, it's not intended to be a barrier, but that's how it's perceived. That's what it communicates. Same thing with the exalted pulpit back here. What does that communicate? I'm higher than you. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Not only does it communicate I'm higher than you, but our language has idioms like speaking down to people that is built off of that idea. The idea of the ivory towers of academia is suggesting that they are elevated and protected from the masses. And all of that is communication. And he's saying, look, your communication matches your beauty. It's just as desirable. Love is not sustained by physical attraction alone. If we pursue a relationship purely because of physical attraction, it is more than likely a relationship that is doomed to failure. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The most obvious and puerile version of a reason for that is because beauty is fleeting. And so if that's the only reason I'm pursuing you is because I think you're beautiful, then when the beauty's gone, I have no more reason to pursue you. And if God looked at me that way, that he was only going to love me if I was attractive to him, how long would I be in fellowship with God? Not very long. Um, so covenant fellowship is deepened through words that communicate affection, confidence, trust, delight, and through behavior that communicates the same thing. Her love in verse 12 has been faithfully reserved. A garden locked is my sister. Okay, think of a formal garden, a fenced in garden. It's got a gate. The Secret Garden. Have I read that book, The Secret Garden? You got this locked gate. You can't get in. You don't know what's on the other side. You can't participate in it. That's what she is. She is chaste. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A spring locked, a fountain sealed. Um, so she's beautiful. She's fruitful. She's refreshing. She's protected and preserved for her mate. She's not a garden to be enjoyed by everyone. She's a garden to be kept for the object of her love. She's not made herself indiscriminately available. Um, what she now is giving to the bridegroom has been kept for that relationship. The marriage bed is undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. Um, that's just a much more direct way of saying the same thing. The locked garden does not suggest barrenness. There's some people that, oh, she's barren. That's not what this is suggesting at all. In fact, the following verses describe abundant fruit and fragrance and flowing water and all of those things. She's clearly not barren. She's chaste. Her protected love is full of life and fruitfulness. As I mentioned, that's what she goes on, or the text goes on to talk about, describing her as being full of pomegranates and choice fruits and henna and nard and saffron and calamus and cinnamon and frankincense and myrrh and aloes. What are all these things? It's an interesting list of things. Okay, pomegranates are very desirable. You actually don't eat anything but the little seeds inside of them, but that's another story. Choice fruits, not just fruits, but choice fruits, the good stuff. henna and nard and well, let's stop at henna. Now, what is henna and nard? They're perfumes. They're things that are delightful to the olfactory sense. So we've got things that taste good, and we've got things that smell good, and then we go to saffron. Anybody know what saffron is? It is a spice. How many of y'all cook with saffron every day? I want to say every day. Good saffron, very expensive. It is sold by the portion of the gram, and it's still expensive. You might get a quarter of a gram or a half a gram, and you're still spending more money than you would spend on any other spice in the spice rack. However, it's very desirable, very pleasant, both to the smell and to the taste. And visually, when you add saffron to a recipe, the color pops. And so saffron is put out there as something that appeals to all of our senses. Calamus and cinnamon and frankincense and myrrh, and now we're talking about all sorts of spices, and particularly interestingly, warming spices that not only affect how things taste, but they affect how you feel when you taste them. And then ultimately aloes, which is about those things that do what? What do aloes do? They soothe you. They provide care for you. So all this language is being used to convey that the whole person and the full nature of the relationship and the benefit that is derived from the relationship. And again, keep in mind that this is the groom saying, this is what I benefit from you to the bride. And that becomes important when we start thinking about the various ways to apply this relationship. Covenant faithfulness does not suppress love. It preserves love so that it can flourish where it properly belongs. That is the imagery here. The bride willingly invites the bridegroom into the life she's reserved for him. Look at verse 16. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden. Let its spices flow. This is an invitation. Some translations read, and eat its choicest fruits at the end. An invitation for participation in this garden, which has been protected and preserved and kept and locked from everyone else. The gate's open to you. So it belongs to him. She first speaks of my garden, but then invites her beloved to enter. Did you notice the language there? Let my beloved come into his garden. See, the first part of this statement is my garden. The second part is it's yours. It belongs to you. This change reflects the movement and shift of covenant love and the nature of covenant love. There are no longer two, but one. What is mine is yours. If you've suffered through this story before, I apologize before I tell it, but there bound to be somebody here who hasn't. My wife, when she was in college the first time, changed majors, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. I don't remember. I lost count. For a brief period of time, a semester or two, she was a sociology major. And that required her to take a bunch of courses, including college taught marriage and family courses, which is the biggest bunch of bunk that I've ever read in my life. They have no clue what marriage is supposed to be or what it's for or where it came from or anything. It's mind blowing. They think we made it up by watching monkeys. They really do. I got the quotes in there. But she actually got ostracized publicly by her teacher when the teacher asked the question about the married students in the room, which she was at the time, and then asked if our property was held commonly or separately. And she says, everything goes into one bank account. And he said, essentially, you're an idiot. You should keep your property separate from the beginning. So, in his language, when you separate, it'll be easier. Also a big advocate of prenuptial agreements and all sorts of things like that, which is essentially planning for the end of the relationship rather than viewing it as there are no longer two but one. And what God has joined together, let not man separate. And listen, man, used in that sentence, what God has joined together and let not man separate, is a generic way of saying humanity. It's short for mankind. It's not a gender word. It's not a sex word. Male and female, he created them. But man, as it's used there, is talking about mankind that he created in his image and likeness. What God has joined together into one, let not mankind separate. Guess who's included in that? Me. It's not just talking about other people. It's saying that I shouldn't seek, plan, or desire to separate what God has joined together. Everything being expressed here in these verses is this is a real relationship. I want you to know how I feel about it. I want you to know what my commitment is to it. And I want you to know that everything I have is yours. It's no longer mine. The way Paul argues this to the church in Corinth is that the man does not control his own body, but the woman does. And the woman does not control her own body, but the man does. And that is simply an expression of mutual possession. No longer two, but one. My garden, your garden. Same garden, dual ownership. My beloved is mine and I'm his. The exact same thing, only expressed about the person. Mutual belonging now approaches its complete marital expression. That's what's going on here. This is growing closer and closer to a union in where both parties recognize that the covenant's been ratified and that there is no distinguishing between one and the other. And boy, you talking about some challenges when you start realizing that you have been engaged into a covenant relationship with God and that now everything that you own, God owns. That means your speech and your conduct, your behavior, the way that you reflect in the world is reflecting not just on me anymore, but reflecting on whom? God. You are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body. There's an obligation that we have because of this relationship. When Jesus is asked about literally the marriage relationship and the obligations in that relationship, his disciples, after the crowds go away and it's just Jesus and the disciples say, well, if this is true about marriage, then it's better not to marry. That's how serious and significant these things are. You remember what Jesus' response was to that statement by his disciples? It's an interesting one. Not everyone can do that. In other words, okay, you may discern that the cost is higher than you want to pay, but not everyone can live righteously and godly and not have this relationship. And he talks about those that are eunuchs by birth and those that are made eunuchs and some other things in that context. But his simple point is this: not everyone can do that. Chapter 4 ends with the bride's invitation to him. And the bridegroom's answer immediately follows in chapter 5 and verse 1. I came to my garden. You hear that the bridegroom now claims the garden as his own. So it starts with her saying, come into your garden. And he says, I came to my garden. All right, I got to stop. Clock's saying I have to stop. Very quickly, I'll just touch on these things. We'll get into chapter 5 more fully next time. In chapter 4, the bridegroom delights in his bride. In the gospel story, Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Ephesians chapter 5. In Solomon 4, the bride is called away from separation and danger. In the gospel story, Christ calls his people out of darkness into light and fellowship with him. 1 Peter chapter 2 and 1 John chapter 1. In Solomon 4, the bridegroom's love awakens returned love. 1 John 4, we love because he first loved us. In Solomon 4, the garden is faithfully guarded for the bridegroom. In the gospel story, the church is to remain faithfully devoted to Christ. In Solomon 4, the bride willingly invites the bridegroom to enter. In the gospel story, Christ seeks willing fellowship with those who hear his voice and will open to him. Revelation 3:20, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone will open up, I will go in and dine. That invitation is essential. The expression of that invitation is essential. God does not rob or steal his people. He doesn't kick down the door and come in against our will and take what is his. He stands at the door and knocks and waits for us to open and invite him in, which is exactly what's happening here at the end of this chapter. Is as this relationship progresses, it gets to the point that she says, come in to my garden, which is your garden. And that is echoed in the story. Then chapter 4, the bride gives herself to the one whom she belongs. In 1 Corinthians 6, 19 through and 20, those redeemed by Christ recognize that they are no longer their own, but they belong to him. And so we see these kinds of things repeating themselves. Any questions or comments before we stop? All right. Prepare next time for chapter 5, and maybe we'll get through the whole chapter.